12 years. Just have to get a break note from mine.
To get electric shock on this time.
In your new role.
So I am ready.
I will.
Gallery tonight.
Of course,
What's happening?
Very quiet.
Which
is great to be here, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, well, we're just about to make it not so quiet. Councillors, before we start the meeting this evening, I would like to read a webcast statement. This council meeting will be webcast, and I remind all those present that their words and actions will be broadcast to a wider audience, and certain conduct is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Should any person not wish to be recorded, I advise that they should leave the meeting room prior to any statements being made. Any defamatory statements made are not the position of the council and remain an individual's opinion. Council accepts no responsibility for any defamatory statements, and all liability remains with the person making the remarks. And now to our Acknowledgement of Country. I would like to acknowledge the Kamilaroi people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present here tonight. And to our meeting prayer, I'd ask that we all be upstanding, please. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council, direct and prosper our deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people, the Regional Council and Australia. Amen.
Amen.
And councillors, I would now like to formally open the meeting and call for apologies and leave of absence. And as we are all in attendance and we have no leave of absence tendered, we'll move to item 2, community consultation. We have no representation from the community this evening. So that'll bring us to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Webb and Councillor Inglis, thank you. Any matters arising from those minutes? If not, Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to your motion? Councillors, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Aye. Those against, the motion is carried. Item 4, disclosures of interest. Any councillors have any disclosures?
Yeah, item 8.2, I have a non-pecuniary, less than significant interest as I own a property in Bright Street.
Thank you. Any other declarations, councillors? Councillor Rodder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 8.1, I would like to register a less than significant non-pecuniary interest as the matter is being dealt with by my department, Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. However, as I have absolutely nothing to do with Water New South Wales or DPI Water, I will remain in the chamber and participate in discussion.
Thank you. Any further disclosures? If not, we'll move to, there is no mayoral minute and there is no notice of motion, so councillors, that brings us to item 8.1. Move Councillor Webb and Councillor Betts. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, it's a pretty good summation of what I think we need to put together in the submission, and I say well done, Bruce. I think there's some stuff there that probably that I would like to just add a few points to, but really I think it's great that we were at there, and we're going to put some, I think, put a very meaningful submission in. And hopefully they'll listen, and I think maybe they might this time, because this would be the first time since I've been involved in local government that I think they've been a bit serious about where we're heading into the future in terms of water security. But the item there, and it talks about item 11, which is on critical human needs, and where 50% of our water is used basically for urban use and the other 50 for other uses. But I think when we're talking about that in our submission, I'd like to see it, and I think it's vitally important that human needs aren't just having a drink and a wash, but they're having a feed. And really, in terms of what we've got here, we've got 3 abattoirs. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but we'd be in excess of 30% of that water other than urban use would probably be used by those three works. It'd be somewhere around 30%, I would assume.
Closer to 50.
Closer to 50. Well, I didn't think it was quite that high, but anyway. So I think what we've got to say in our submission is the fact that that is part of critical human needs. We're not only feeding the people in our region, but it's going far further. It's feeding the people on the coast, it's feeding the cities. That has to be encompassed in that critical human needs. The fact that we're using that non-urban water that they're looking at, that has to be encompassed in our critical human need, water security. I guess that's pretty much all I want to say, Mr Mayor, other than I really think the rest of it's not too bad.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against?
We're going to include additional dot points. Just need to be happy that Councillor Betts will still second the motion if we add a dot point around what Councillor Webb just said.
So, yeah, Councillor Betts, are you okay with that as
Yes.
seconder? Thanks. So we've got some words there for that, to embellish that dot point.
So it'll be a new dot point, Councillor Webb.
Well, I don't think we need, I just think if we can embellish that one a bit to make sure that it actually includes, and to make sure that it's inclusive of
Food processing.
food
as
processing plants, and in brackets, including
included in critical needs.
in critical needs, yeah. It's just,
That's in the second last dot point.
Yeah.
it's vitally important that we get that in there. And it's actually about not eating and drinking and washing, it's about eating as well. And that is a critical human need. I find it a critical human need anyway.
Mr Mayor, a few suggested words, because I wrote one out actually, because I absolutely agree with Councillor Webb, that food, for example, food distinguish between food processing and food production, but food processing to meet the objective of critical human need.
So how do you suggest?
I'd say just a new dot point.
I knew the
Yeah, I was thinking a new
It'll
dot
make
point.
it easier, I think.
production of food is critical need.
Food processing, to meet the objective of critical human need, by placing
Sorry.
food processing to meet the objective of critical human need, by placing a weighting factor on the value proposition of sustaining food production. In other words, there should be a metric or something in there, just like we do with population, I reckon, because it's unique in Tamworth. As we've just said, it's up to 50% of the water, but there wouldn't be a place in New South Wales that produces the volume of protein that's produced here, and as we know, New South Wales is dependent on that production. We need somewhere in there that unique set of circumstances is recognised.
I thought we were the highest area in Australia, not New South
Oh,
Wales.
yeah, we probably are.
Highest protein.
Yeah. And Councillor Webb's mentioned that. How's that read, Councillor Webb?
I think that's great. Councillor Inglis, it's so good that you can put words together a lot better than I can, but that's exactly what I'm aiming at.
EIGHT.
Mr Mayor, the fact that it's a 20 to 4, I'll use my 5 minutes now, Councillor Murray.
Given I'm going to write the submission, I need to understand what that means, and I'm sorry I don't at the moment.
What we're saying is that the food processing that occurs in Tamworth, principally between the 3 abattoirs, there needs to be a metric or a calculation in the assessment of critical human need, which we know is essentially just a population number. So that regard is made, because up to 50% of our water consumption goes to those 3 abattoirs. And those 3 abattoirs, as Councillor Webb said, produce something that all of New South Wales needs. So in other words, if our dam at Chaffey runs down and we have to close those food processing centres, New South Wales, beyond
Sorry.
Tamworth,
So, yes, Mr Mayor, so there are two issues. One is that the staff that work there won't have a job, but they'll have something to drink, and the second issue is we're concerned that people in New South Wales won't have access to the food that was produced at those plants. So they're the two issues. Okay.
Mr Mayor, it's a 20 to 40 year plan, so it's important that we try and get as many things in it as possible. I agree with Councillor Webb. I think there is a real and genuine attempt here to take an integrated approach. By that I mean looking at technology, looking at infrastructure, looking at education, looking at regulatory and looking at policy. So that's lovely, because I don't think that's happened to date in the context of having formal plans. But the challenge, of course, is to make those strategies fit for purpose. So we must ensure that the limited resource of water is managed intelligently and at all times placing a priority on critical human need. Mr Mayor, there's 56 options in that paper, and I agree with Councillor Webb. Mr Logan's done a good job in that report, but I do believe that there are quite a few options in here that we haven't given sufficient regard. Now, I don't know if we get another chance of it. For example, the idea of the pipeline to keep it. As you know, when Chaffey was looking as if we were going to go into the single digits in capacity, remember we got approached through the state government to start looking at those emergency options.
Yep.
And one of them was moving forward with looking at that pipeline to keep it as the backup. Now that's one of the options in there, for example. One of the options in there is to make the Chaffey emergency pipeline that got put in to be full-time and not just when the dam is below 20%. It is absolutely ridiculous when we know there's 100% transmission losses when we release water not by the pipeline, but if we're over 20%, we don't use that pipeline. That's silly stuff. That's silly stuff. So I think we shouldn't be missing our opportunity on some of those to make the points on a few of those things. Thanks.
So, Councillor Inglis, are you suggesting maybe we should have another couple of dot points, include another couple of dot points, because this is the submission?
Yeah.
If the
Well,
mover and seconder...
Okay, happy to entertain it, but I'd like to suggest that the Chaffey emergency pipeline that got constructed be made permanent.
I do.
I'd certainly agree to that as a mover of the.
That's number, Bruce, that was number, and it's in here as one of the suggested actions. It's option 3. So, okay, so some words. Operating, so we're recommending the operation of the Chaffey to Tamworth pipeline at all times. Also keep it simple.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that, like as in and not as an emergency? Or
No, I wouldn't
that makes it pretty
complicate
clear.
it. It's very simple.
What does everyone think about that?
That's clear.
The pipeline to keep it.
Yes.
I think that should be
Yes.
scoped out, because remember they were going to use that as an emergency measure. They were going to get in and do that had Chaffey got down to under 10%.
But that showed up in our first thing,
So that should be at least scoped out as a backup. Everyone agree with that one? Don't? What does everyone else think?
Councillor Inglis, could you just please address the councillor through the chair, please?
Sorry, Mr Mayor. Well, there's others there. I'm not sure how you want to deal with it, Mr Mayor, but I just think there are some other options there that we should be putting forward.
Look, I think our options will look a little similar as the 60 odd other options if we keep going, because a lot of them are quite relevant, and I think and the report actually suggests that it definitely all the options won't be considered. So I think I would certainly encourage the councillors to try and keep it as tight as we're reasonably able to. This will be revisited over the life of the proposal, inevitably, and there will be options. I would suggest.
Mr Mayor, if I can make a comment, I think you're right. The DPI have been very, very straightforward about the 56 options won't be there won't be 56 options. The final strategy might have 56 in them, but they will reduce. They will then go through a process of elimination, and they've actually put down the dot points of the criteria that they're going to assess those options against. So, and we will have some involvement in those finalising those options. So I think we will have another opportunity. The 2 points that Councillor Inglis has raised, they're already councils on record as supporting the full-time operation of Chaffey Dam pipeline, and the Keep It Dam pipeline was one of the 4 options that. So they're already very much in the public record as being council's position, and I think that the staff can certainly raise those issues with DPIE when we get the opportunity to discuss the final set of options that are going to be adopted, and then there's another step after that, and that is for them actually to do something in relation to the preferred options that are finally settled on. So there's a few steps yet about before we've solved our water problems, that's for sure.
So just one question before we finish with Councillor Inglis. It was your intent, Councillor, to include the Chaffey Dam pipeline in this list of priorities?
I think everyone's keen for that
So
one.
if we could just get some words.
Crazy.
The operation of the Chaffey Dam to Tamworth pipeline remain
No,
operational.
the Keep It.
Oh, the Keep It.
Pipeline. The Keep It pipeline, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Keep It pipeline.
that one's important, the Chaffey pipeline, because it's there now, Mr Mayor.
And so maybe an additional dot point might read something like that the Keep It Dam to Tamworth pipeline be considered, be one of the options considered.
Through Tamworth.
Okay, firstly we'll get back to
I just wanted to add to that
protocol.
actually, if we could.
Beg your pardon?
I just want to add to Councillor Inglis.
Yes, no, that's fine, you'll get the opportunity in a second. Are there any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Now we have a motion. If not, I'll open the floor. Councillor Betts, and you're next.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the call. Look, fantastic report. Totally agree with my fellow councillors. There's a lot of work to go into that. I have spent a bit of time, a lot of time, reading that report from State Water, and it is a genuine attempt, I think, and we have an opportunity to really secure our water, not only for the Tamworth region, but for the state. And I think it's a great step forward. Yes, totally agree. The Chaffey Dam pipeline should be permanent because that's a nil loss and a guaranteed coming straight into Tamworth. One of the things that I noticed in the report, and I think we really need to certainly keep it in this, but push it as a matter of urgency almost outside of this, is the link between the alluvium water and the groundwater. That was one of the biggest issues that caused us to run out of water this year, is part of the other one, but one of the biggest, that it was intrinsically linked to the groundwater. And we really need to make sure that that doesn't happen again, because the time this report comes out, I think that we'll be in the same situation. If they haven't changed that, we'll go and we'll lose our water again. So the water sharing plan has got to change to reflect that. I don't disagree that the Keep It pipeline should be included in that, but if you read the report, there are a number of options. There's a significant number of options, including inland diversions, which probably won't get a Guernsey, but there's options such as a pipeline from Copeton Dam and also from the Artesian Basin. They need to be looked at. We didn't look at those when we looked at our 4 other options, which I think are an option that was very, very objectively considered. But we haven't had a chance to look at the long-term option of Copeton. Now, Copeton has a huge capacity of water, and probably better than any of the others. So I wouldn't like to see us just lock Tamworth Regional Council into Keep It at this stage. Certainly it's right up there on the forefront, but I'd like to see us look at all options, just leave it as per the recommendation and support those alternate options. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Tickle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just going to make a comment further to Councillor Inglis' very positive notations and additions, but with regards to the pipeline, 6 years ago I brought a notice of motion to this council to look at the long-term water security for Tamworth following the augmentation of Chaffey Dam. That was endorsed by the council at the time, and the Director of Water and his department very swiftly looked into all of that and engaged Town of Water to look at options. Two of those options were pipelines, three. One was the covered pipeline from Chaffey, the other was a pipeline from Keepit into Chaffey, and the other one was from a pipeline from Split Rock. And because that scoping or feasibility is all there, we had all the information. Of course, the usual, we wait till we run dry and out of water before we thoroughly look into it. So better late than never. This is a positive move forward, but there is a lot of information, feasibility and scoping already on file, and I wholeheartedly agree with the comments made so far. It's just ludicrous that that pipeline has been built at a huge expenditure of millions and millions of dollars, and it's closed off. We can't use it. It just does not make sense at all. Agree with the Director of Water and his comments in here, and in particular the water security should not just be assessed on our present demand, but we have to look into the future. But the rest is quite self-explanatory. But I did want to point out that this council had addressed long-term water security many years ago, and we have all the information and all the scoping here on file already.
Councillor Rodder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree 100% with Councillor Inglis in relation to addition of Keepit Dam pipeline to Tamworth, consideration of, and I don't think there's a lot of options there that that we wouldn't obviously need. We're one of the regions that obviously was greatly impacted during the drought, and I think that it's important that we basically tell the government this is what we want. We want to be sustainable into the future, and so these are some of the options that we want the government to seriously look at. And if they're not in there, then they might sort of think, well, it's not really important to us. I agree there are plenty of great options in the draft Namoi Regional Water Strategy options document, plenty, heaps. I'm not necessarily enamoured by the proposed 22.5 gigalitre $500 million plus Dungowan Dam. I'm not confident that it will secure Tamworth's water future as they keep on lauding, as the 100 gigalitre augmentation of Chaffey Dam was lauded to have secured Tamworth's water future, and we saw between 2017 and 19 that we were down, and at the beginning of last year, down to 12.9% in a very invidious position because of water releases over the 2017 to 19 water periods. And we've seen the water management around the state quite murky, and I'd like to refer Council to a comments of the Water Minister just last week on Sky News. She said the Dungowan Dam project will see the current dam be replaced with a larger one based on the Peel River, which will provide much needed water resources to the Tamworth region. But then she said, however, the Murray-Darling Basin cap means more water cannot be allocated to farmers or towns in the region. So there's that interesting juxtaposition of we're going to get water security if we get that dam, but on the other side, we're not going to get water security because there's going to be no more water to be allocated to farmers or towns in the region. But what she goes on to say, but what we can do is give greater security. That's water's going to be there. That's water's going to be there. I mean, she said, and I find that really confusing. And it sounded confusing when I said it. That the water is going to be there, but for who? Water recycling and purification will address the shortages due to environmental shortages due to drought and over-allocation of resources. I believe our water licensing system in New South Wales and around Australia has been corrupted by successive governments. They let the cat out of the bag by disconnecting water licences from land And, you know, we'll probably never be able to put the lid back on that problem. And that was evidenced by, you know, rural water supplies shortages around the state during the most recent drought. Water purification technology doesn't have to be used for drinking, just to allay the concerns of those who don't wish to consume something that has been flushed down the toilet. But keep in mind the efforts of the CSIRO and our council has partnered with, plus the efforts of BIATA in the water purification and recycling space, which I think they should be commended for. And I really do think that that's the future. And I think that, you know, once we can get through the EPA and legislative maze that all presents, and how do we get rid of the salt waste, I think we can, you know, we'll be able to enjoy a more secure water supply through water purification technology. The drought of record needs to be reinstated into calculations about how much water is held back in reserve for rural communities during times of drought. There needs to be changes to Water Management Act and the Water Management Amendment Act. Although I acknowledge this does not form part of this recommendation. And again, as I'll restate that the current water trading regime has failed our country. The options that investigates pipelines from established dams such as Keepit and Split Rock dams has merit and should be investigated further, although I acknowledge that may not be the prerogative of Water New South Wales when they consider all the options. We also need more flexibility in environmental flows during times of rain events, as we've seen this week. As a community, we also need to strenuously resist the proposal by the Water Minister to amalgamate the Peel and Nemoy valleys for the purposes of a future water sharing plan into one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Mr Mayor, just a short one. I think it's a great substantial list here. I'm impressed. But one thing that I'm pleased to hear is that the Peel Valley is relatively unique when considering it. And as a result, there needs to be solutions developed that are unique to the Peel Valley. And some of the things we're discussing right now could come up in that, but it is a unique valley, and that's what's caused a lot of our issues when we've been logged with many other valleys of quite different dimensions. So thanks for including that. I think that's really critical.
Thank you, Councillor Andy.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I agree with everybody so far, and I also agree that the work that has been put into the report is quite substantial. And in fact, I think there's a language in there that suggests that there's a real serious attempt to do something about water once and for all, which is really nice to see, although it will be, time will tell whether or not the report and the information in there produces some good results for us. But I think just a quick one on the Keepit Dam pipeline. Just a question: would it be chewing too much meat off the bone to suggest that? And there was a bit of language in the report that suggested that water transfer may be a possibility, but water being able to be transferred from, say, Keepit to Chaffey, or back the other way around if need be. If there's a lot of flow into Chaffey and it's overflowing and they need more water to keep it, could all the dams be interconnected? I mean, I think the good people of Tamworth would be expecting us as their host organisation to be looking at every single option that could be on the table. And if each of the main storages were interconnected with each other, in times where we do have good rain in one part of the region and not in the other parts of the region, it might be something we can work with. But I guess it's just a point I wanted to raise. A couple of quick observations. I wonder whether or not they're looking at the population figures and they still think we had 43,000 people in 2019. I do wonder where they get their figures from, because of course we include Moonbi Katingal as water users because they use Chaffey's water as well. So I'm sure there are more than 43,000 people living in our region in 2019 who uses the water in Chaffey Dam. And perhaps why they think that that's the reason why water security and long-term sustainability of water will be looked after well and truly with the new Dungowan Dam, which I think is a dam that I'm warming up to that. I think it's if there's some transferable water between, say, Dungowan and Chaffey at least, well then we've seen a lot of water flow into Dungowan Dam of late, and if that could be transferred into Chaffey, that will help. just a quick little observation, between 1894 and 2020, 126 years, if I understand the figures correctly, inflow into Chaffey and Dungowan exceeded 100 gigalitres in those years 23 times, Mr Mayor, and only seven of those were between 1949 and 1957, and it only occurred another 8 times between 1957 and 2020. So we talk about climate change, or the evolution of the climate and the weather systems changing and so forth. I think we all agree that weather is changing. It does always change because it's natural, and there's some evidence there. And interestingly, the lowest 3-year averages of rainfall in the Peel Valley occurred after 1960, and most recently between 2017 and 2019. So 3 of the driest 3-year periods occurred after 1960. But 3 of the driest 10-year periods occurred before 1950. So maybe droughts are shorter these days than what they were 50 years ago. And last but not least, cold water pollution, Mr Mayor. I'd never heard of that term before, but it was in the report, and it relates to the flows out of the dam when there's a release, and it affects the life cycles of native fish in many ways. So I think maybe cold water pollution might be another small issue that the powers that be need to be concerned with.
Thank you. And Councillor Maxwell.
Mr Mayor, I don't think there's much that hasn't been said actually, but I think we've got to be very careful that we don't confuse a very good report by adding too much more to it. I think quite often, like if we make it too long and too complicated, it's going to get lost in the maze. So I think it's a very good report, and I compliment the director on it. Hope we get somewhere along with it.
Thank you. And councillors, I'd just like to add one comment also. I know in this chamber many times over the last few years we've been very critical of our water minister and of the agencies that she in her water directorate, but it's pretty comforting tonight to hear some complimentary discussions about some good work that the Minister and the departmental staff are doing. So that's certainly is a welcome change, and we look forward to seeing what the outcomes in the final draft might look like. So, Councillor Webb, do you wish to close the debate?
I'll close the debate if I can, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points that have come up through the discussion, and that's nothing in respect to the report, Mr Mayor, but first of all, the only thing is the pipeline to keep it. I'm not supporting it, but we've got to all be very mindful that Keep It Dam is over allocated by about 3 or 4 times. So there's no license available there. And secondly, in relation to that, when we were running out of water in Chaffey, keep it at about 3% into or 2%. So you've just got to bear that in mind when you consider putting that forward as a recommendation for consideration. If you're going to look at that as a recommendation as part of this and push too hard on it, then the next part of that is going to be how are you going to guarantee some water in that dam that would be left available for the city. The second one, Mr Mayor, is, and Councillor Rodder raised the issue about Melinda Povey saying there'd be no more water. Well, she did correct that the next day, and yes, there will be more water, we know that. There was a miscommunication there, or she said what she shouldn't have said, but there will be more water, so we need to be made mindful. We need to know that, and I think that just needs to be pointed out.
Thank you. So, councillors, that closes the debate. I'll now put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. That takes us to item 8.2. Move Councillor Empey and Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Councillor Empey, do you wish to speak to motion?
Yeah, just a quick one. Very quick one. The Carthage Street issue around parking and so forth, and alterations of parking spaces. I drive that road often. It's a very clear intersection. I just think people drive to the conditions. It's a safe road. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Wilson.
Yes, Mr Mayor, that's an interesting comment and an interesting intersection. I've had a car written off in that intersection I was heading up the hill and a guy stopped at the stop sign and then he floored it and I spun 360 and wrecked my car off. And it was a substantial car, so I wasn't hurt, but I know they should drive to the conditions, but they don't. And I actually had a call from an ophthalmology practice up there that was quite concerned. They called today. They read a report that indicated that the whole of the blocks would be parallel parked, but they're not. But that wasn't the case. So he was quite happy about that. But nevertheless, raised the issue of the high demand on parking in that street because of the sorts of people that access practices, and also the church when there's fairly big funerals or whatever. I suggested to him that there'd been discussion among councillors about a roundabout there. He said he's deliberately been watching it and feels that it's the speed that's more the issue. And I wondered, the traffic perfectionists can help me here, but those zigzag lines you sometimes see in places that actually warn you that something's coming up. They're bold and they're ugly and they're middle of the road and they're zigzag, that really says you're approaching something that needs to be taken with more care. What a minimal way of perhaps reducing the traffic enthusiasm to get through that intersection, especially at 3 o'clock and a bit after when St Nick's people are all coming one way and school's coming the other way and there's a preschool there. That something simple like big zigzag lines that are saying you need to slow down and take a bit more care. I don't know whether that's possible in an urban street, but could I ask the question?
Councillor Betts, would you like to?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. All those options were considered by the Traffic Committee and the Traffic New South Wales, or Transport New South Wales, sorry, and the police and council representatives. One of the issues with that intersection is very wide and open, and people get confused about the expanse and they go a little bit too quick and they think it's an open intersection that speed does become an issue. What they're looking at now is to reduce the actual width, so it makes people consciously have to slow down, delineate the centre line so that it is a more confined intersection, so that it gives more perception that it is a dangerous intersection. As the RMS have pointed out, that they will be going back and looking at the option of a roundabout in that area, and all the stuff that they're putting in place now won't compromise if a roundabout is constructed in the future. But they are actually looking at the option of a roundabout, and they're going to go back and look at that.
Thank you. And councillors, I'd urge us all to recognise the expertise that sits around our Traffic Committee meeting table. We have all of those people there for a specific purpose because of their expertise, and I think we need to be careful as laymen what we might whether we should be considering overruling them or because they put a lot of work into this committee. And Councillor Fickle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's the easy one first, which is the parallel parking. That I think it needs to be noted that the parallel parking is only for approximately in front of 2 residences. It's just immediately around the corner in Carthy Street. It's not the whole street. It is a notoriously dangerous intersection, as Councillor Wilson rightly pointed out, and Councillor Betts. I go past that intersection perhaps 2-3 times a day, and I can tell you it's not a pretty sight when you witness an accident, which I have done on more than one occasion, even though the official stats say there are 2, but as we know they don't always get reported. But I've seen a terrible accident there with the vehicle turned upside down and children screaming. It is a very, very dangerous corner, not only for motorists but for we pedestrians, and there are many pedestrians. There's St Nicholas School just a block or so up the road, and there's a preschool right on that early childhood set up right on that corner. I support the Traffic Committee's recommendation, and as the Mayor pointed out, we've got several representatives on there, including the police presence and RMS. I totally support the recommendations, however my preference would be for a roundabout if the state government fund it, and I think it's a significant enough intersection with a long history of accidents. Even though I said that the statistics aren't there, but the statistics are there for speeding. 85% of people exceeding the speed limit in an area where there is a early childhood centre right there at the intersection is just totally unacceptable. It was until recently used 60 kilometres an hour area, but it's been 50 now for some time. But I think motorists need to take more responsibility and slow down. But overall, it has got to that point where it definitely needs a roundabout, and it's encouraging to know that the RMS are supporting that and seeking funding.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 8.3. With Councillor Inglis and Councillor Wilson, thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Well, Mr Mayor, just I found it interesting, the reduced consumption there, that little table that's there just above policy implications. In percentage terms, that's a huge reduction, and I assume that gets down just to a change in behaviour. With that would, if that more approach by ratepayers to using less and less water, of course, we will need to be mindful of that when we're setting budgets, obviously, because that also has a direct impact on reduced income.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Tickle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Agree with Councillor Inglis, excellent report, and encouraging to see the number of incentives that have been taken up, and people are definitely becoming more water wise because of the drought and also because of the excellent education programs that we've had. At some point in time though, I think an incentive to have a water tank or to have your evaporative cooler serviced should be, the incentive in itself to save water should be embraced by the community without having to have a financial incentive to have what I would term house maintenance, to have an evaporative cooler serviced. However, it has highlighted how much water that they do waste when they're not properly maintained. In October 2019, I brought a motion to this council which was adopted, unanimously supported, and that was to look into water sensitive design, investigate water sensitive design, and in particular stormwater design in new subdivisions and in other areas, and also grey water recycling. That motion was addressed very promptly and very efficiently. Part of the motion was to educate the community on grey water reuse. We had wonderful brochures produced. We had meetings with industry. We had meetings with the public. The media were excellent and gave us lots of airplay on that particular motion. In fact, it was so successful that in November only last year, 2020, an amendment number 14 to our development control plan was adopted by this council. Again, that was following community consultation and public exhibition. So it's a wonderful outcome. Part of that DCP amendment was to have an external drainage pipe available for all new residential builds so that grey water could be recycled. For 40, 50 years throughout Australia, it's just not in Tamworth, we have allowed new builds to have all their plumbing just concreted over so nobody can get to, you can't get to the grey water, let alone when you have a plumbing problem. There's a major problem there in having to dig up a whole area. However, with the grey water recycling, that is a major step forward. Also part of the whole plan and in the DCP was to be fast tracking DAs within 10 days instead of 28 days, the usual time, if other criteria were met. So, Mr Mayor or Mr General Manager, through the Mayor, I wondered if we could have a brief progress report on grey water recycling. It is something that is achievable. A toilet, for example, uses 100 litres per person per week. So there are significant savings in potable water that can be made by reusing grey water. However, it is very obvious that we have to continue to educate the community, and in the community I include our tradespeople. So we all have to have a better understanding. It is such a simple process and one which is achievable. It's more palatable than saying to recycle sewage and drink it. We're not asking anyone to drink this water, in fact you can't, but it can be used on the garden, in a washing machine and down the toilet. So thank you to the staff for progressing this so quickly. It would be also good to have an update on the stormwater component of that motion with new residential and subdivision design in particular. So thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson.
A question, Mr Mayor. A tradie approached me a couple of weeks ago, and he repairs evaporative coolers, and he was talking about the system here that we've got for reimbursements, and he said the trouble is you lot pay the household and they don't pay us, and I would have thought we paid on receipt, not on accounts. Can I just ask that question, because it didn't make sense to me?
No, Mr Mayor, we only pay on receipt.
Thank
Only
you.
pay on receipt.
I'm encouraged by that, because I was a bit surprised when that came up and I didn't see how that could be. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.1. Move Councillor Inglis and Councillor Rodder, thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Mr Mayor, just to mention that I know this is one of your favourite committees, that the committee is operating very effectively, so that councillors can be assured, because they've got an important role to play. But Mr Mayor, as you know, the changes are on foot, and we thought they were going to be probably here by now, but the latest advice is that we're going to be getting some new guidelines probably within the next month or so, and they are going to put them back onto public consultation. This will be the third time, because the industry has really responded, Mr Mayor. As you know, they were heading down the path of not actually allowing councillors to be on the audit committee at all. But my understanding is they're going to relax on that one, and councillors will be allowed to be on there, but probably have no voting rights. So that's better than nothing, I guess. But and the other big change is there'll be a new internal audit coordinator role introduced, and some pre-qualification around external members. They were going to come in. They were really upping the bar, that if you wanted to be an independent member, you had to have pretty high qualifications. I think they're going to still do that, but push that out about 5 or 6 years before they implement it. That'd be taking the fact that there's now about 70 councils have these committees. So changes on foot, Mr Mayor, and that'll be in front of us probably in the next couple of months. But that one about no councillors on it, it's just nice to see that, because I think that would have been a mistake to not allow any councillors to be on the audit committee, just to have that conduit there, in particular the Mayor. I mean, the Mayor should be mandatory on it in my view, but it appears they might be dropping that one, Mr Mayor, but we'll find out soon.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.2. Move Councillor Inglis and Councillor Webb, thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Mr Mayor, just to recognise the road analogy, what a lovely local government analogy to have in relation to our investments, the old road analogy, the bumpy road.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.3. Moved Councillor Wilson and Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to your motion? Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Inglis.
Mr Mayor, yeah, I'm just sort of curious in a way. I thought the council might have, the staff might have liked us to be a little bit more definitive, but I'd be interested in the comment. But in the new policy on page 257, it's got 7 days may be placed on stock credit. And I know that was one of the changes the staff wanted, that ability to particularly say, like if you got an account at the tip or something. But I noticed the word may being used, so we're not being very definitive. I thought you would have liked us to have been more definitive about that. And I noticed for the recovery action being instigated, 14 days recovery may be instigated. Don't you want us to be more definitive than that?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll ask our Manager of Finance to provide some information on that.
Through you, Mr Mayor. What we were looking for there was to focus in on repeat offenders. So we were looking for some leniency with, with businesses that might not very often breach council's trading terms. So it was more of an opportunity for repeat offenders to quickly act. So we didn't want anyone to think that, we'd be putting everybody on stop supply if they may have breached our credit terms by 7 days. So it's more just repeat offenders that we were trying to come in swift and harshly on. That's it.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.4. Have Councillor Wilson and Councillor Impey. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to your motion? Any councillors wish to speak against? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Inglis.
Mr Mayor, just an update on the Nundle Lodge, the mould remediation there. I see that's in there, but just how's that going? Just a bit of feedback on that. And the RFS and the SES contribution decrease, it's 33 grand, that's lovely. Was that a COVID related decrease or a permanent decrease?
No, I don't think it was, Councillor Inglis. Certainly about the Nundle stuff, we might take that on notice and provide that in the councillor update for this week, Mr Ish. Yeah, we'll put that in the councillor update for this week.
Mr Chairman.
The mole's been cleaned. Certificate's been provided to say that they can basically re-establish. But we've got the roofing contractor booked for the week after next. We're going to complete those works. And then once they return, we're not expecting the mole to be there.
So approximate time, Mr Mayor, for when people will be allowed back in?
I'd say the next 4 weeks.
Thank you. Okay. Any councillors, any further comments, councillors, on 9.4? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.5, Councillor Inglis and Councillor Betts. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just two things, Mr Mayor. One, on page 272, I'd remove the actual name of the mayor. It's got your name in there.
Yeah, I thought it probably should read the
Otherwise
office.
it'll have to.
Yeah, the office of mayor.
And you, with your new lifestyle not being that far off, Mr Mayor, you might want to just remove your name from it, just the actual name of the mayor. I also noticed, interestingly, on page 275 in the table of precedents, maybe reading an old book, but number 21, privy councillors, number 21 in the seating, we haven't had access to the Privy Council since 1986 from memory, with the Australia Act, so I'm not sure why we've got Privy Councillors in it, but I know they were always in those precedent books and always in there, and there was such a thing, but Australia doesn't have access to that for many times, so you might, it just makes us look like I am a Republican, so I'll declare my interest in that one. But I feel you don't need Privy Councillors in there as number 21 on the order of precedence.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rilla.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a clarification on page 34 of the report, the Governor-General of a state is in fact the State Governor or Lieutenant State Governor. I'm a monarchist, and the reason why Privy Councillors are probably still in existence is because some of them are still alive, like the Right Honourable Ian Sinclair, who was a Privy Councillor, so they're still referred to, and I guess if we invite the very elderly Right Honourable Ian Sinclair to Tamworth, we might want to, seat him at the right place and give him the respect he probably deserves, and or foreign Privy Councillors, but that's probably why they still, they're still in a order of precedence.
Thank you. Okay, any further comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.6, move Councillor Wilson and Councillor Betts. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I will, Mr Mayor. I endorse all the submissions. I think they're sound submissions, and they're good for not only us but for all regional areas in particular. I'd just like to make an adjustment to the first one, just in the commentary, the summary of key arguments. I think mentions this is to do with the federal government health minister relating to the fraud mechanism for regional Australia in determining a district of workplace shortage. And the summary of key arguments says in Tamworth, where are we? While there are currently 4 ophthalmologists, 2 of them are over 60 and approaching retirement. Does the commentary go to the LGA too?
It's included to support the motion, yes.
Okay, well if I could change the word, the commentary, the ophthalmologists are 2 are over 60 approaching retirement, with one of those working part-time. A further part-time practitioner has joined the practice, which is in fact the daughter of Dr. Moore. And the 4th practitioner, and then it picks up to be, as is written, the 4th specialist works under one of the retiring doctors and has a temporary MPN until the 31st of July. Can I say that pressure remains? Could I also say that Dr. Moore rang me today and he asked if I could express to the council his thanks for the effort we're putting into having this situation rectified, where really regional Australians are crying out for medical services and for specialists. And in this particular instance, there's somebody, an ophthalmologist who's well qualified in Australia and England, wants to stay, loves Tamworth, but has told that he's only been practising in Australia for 6 years, not 10, so therefore he'll have to leave. And it's just ridiculous. And on the other hand, mechanisms have been put in place to encourage doctors and specialists to come to Tamworth, yet to regional areas, yet when we've got one who frantically wants to stay, involved himself in all the community, he's told he'll have to leave. He can practice in Sydney, 2 k's from an eye hospital, because it doesn't have a specialist, but not in Tamworth under the current circumstances. So it actually is quite urgent. Dr. Moore asked if I could express his thanks for the council working towards rectifying this, and said that it weighs quite heavily on him that a community of and a region of 220,000 residents could be left with 2 full-time practitioners if this is activated. And we might remember, because of our activities, his stay was extended for half a year, but it'll finish in this time. So I'd like to pass on those thanks and hope that council can activate some initiatives that will rectify the situation.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Webb.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I really only want to make comment on the first point, and I think we need to give some clearer direction into what we actually need to have to fix the problem. Now, we've got in here, make appropriate representations to the Federal Government Health Minister to ensure the current review of national medical workforce strategy, and in particular, district workforce shortage is determined when allocating Medicare provider numbers. Now, I've got some wording here that I'd like to see included in that, and that is, I believe that we should put in there some direction, and that is that we regulate Medicare provider numbers by geography, postcode and population.
Through Mr Mayor, if I could just say, Councillor Webb, that would be a direct negative to what we're actually proposing, because that's the way it is actually done. And that's the thing that disadvantages us based on postcodes. Means that you can have another specialist based in Attunga, but they can't access Tamworth because the Tamworth postcode is not seen as being an area of district of workforce shortage. So that would actually be contrary to what this motion is actually trying to achieve.
I'll have to argue that one with you, because we're going to Canberra on Friday with that exact recommendation to the Health Minister.
Don't do that. Mr Mayor, could I?
Councillor Webber's got the floor, I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson.
So, there's been maldistribution of our Medicare numbers. That's what's caused all this. So if we don't determine the distribution of those Medicare numbers by population, geography and postcode, it's never going to work. So you've got doctors in Sydney, for example, that are, those Medicare provider numbers are given based on, they're down there, they want them. Now you can have 1,000 people per Medicare number, but in the bush, it could be 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 or 10,000. But if they make that equal across the state, you can have one Medicare provider number per 2,000 people, well, they're going to have to move out of the city into the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from people that in that field. Anyway, that's my comment. And
Mr Mayor, I'm sure
councillors don't want to
will
support
comment
it.
on this, but my response to Councillor Webb would be, the issue is as it's been explained to me in the way that I've actually researched this, is that it comes down to when you've got a regional centre that services a much larger population and drags in people from much broader population. So, as far away as Moree and other places to come here for people like eye specialists, that because we've got enough specialists to service our local population, we can't keep those additional specialists that are servicing people that are travelling from those other locations, and they don't have access to all the specialist facilities they need in those remote locations to be able to deliver the same level of service. So unless they actually register in Moree, they can't, and they can't access the operating theatres of the Tamworth hospital under that Medicare provider number. So it's a major issue in not having those, an increased number of allocations to a regional centre that is providing these services to a much broader population than what is locally resident in that postcode.
And that's why the distribution is not only by postcode or population, it's by geography. So geography is our region. But anyway, it doesn't look like there'll be a lot of support for that, but I think that's what we need.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to make comment on that?
Mr Mayor, I'm really concerned. I would implore through you, Councillor Webb, not to use that language in this situation. The very reason this situation has arisen is because the numbers are allocated according to postcodes, and that's actually what's caused the issue. So our postcode doesn't include Attunga, doesn't include Nundle, doesn't include Barraba or Bendemeer, doesn't include Moree or Narrabri, all the areas where the ophthalmologists in Tamworth work. They were so desperate about the situation that they decided, in spite of the huge cost of setting up an ophthalmology practice, they would maybe set up one in Attunga, able to, because it was declared an area of need because of its postcode. But that meant because of that postcode, it wouldn't be able, the practitioner there wouldn't be able to operate in Tamworth Hospital because it's a different postcode. In Sydney, if there's a suburb with a postcode and no ophthalmologist, then they're deemed an area of need, despite the fact that there might be an eye hospital next door to that suburb that somebody can drive from 5 or 10 minutes and access. This has been set up for metropolitan situations. What they don't understand is that if we've got an area in need, for instance, Tamworth is an area of need, not an area of need, but a Tunga is, or Moree doesn't have one, or Narrabri, then that means that to get to the next suburb where there is a doctor, such as in Tamworth, it might be a 5 or 10 hour drive. If I can give you an example, there was a fly-in, this was before Christmas, there was a fly-in, fly-out ophthalmologist go to Burke. He flew out and the operation that he did went haywire. And there was nobody there to service him. So he had to be flown to Tamworth. The doctor that's currently going to be removed, because he hasn't been in Australia 10 years, despite having a fellowship in Australia and England, he operated on him and saved his eyesight. We might remember, I'm sure I can say, we might remember there was an accident at our skate park and there was a head injury there. If there hadn't been a 24-hour service in Tamworth, which there is, where if this doctor's removed we won't have, despite for the last 70 years we've had emergency ophthalmology practice in Tamworth available, he would have had to be flown to Sydney or Newcastle and he would have lost the sight in that eye. But the fact that we had this chap here and he operated on both of those, the eye was saved. This is really critical. I could go on to it for a long time. I must admit, the GM and myself have worked on this for a long time.
Councillor Wilson, you'll be well aware
Okay.
of our code of meeting practice, which allows you 5 minutes to present to the
Okay.
council.
Could I ask through you that Councillor Webb and I have a chat later, because it would be devastating to have this reversed.
I'm sure you will, whether I give my approval or not, Councillor Wilson, so I don't know that you need my approval for that.
Yes, K1.
Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Rudder?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just item 2 is certainly a good recommendation. I'm sure that the delegates to the General Assembly will probably appreciate that, particularly those ones from rural drought impacted regions. In relation to number 3, that was raised as a matter of concern by a businessman who was advised, the bill was $1.3 million. It was an amazing amount of money to connect the fibre to the premise to enable him to conduct his business, and there's other sort of quite significant figures too quoted for connection, even in areas where the broadband cables, optic fibre cables go past premises. I guess this is a sting in the tail of privatisation, that we lost an organisation like Telstra that probably would have provided a great communication system if it was still publicly owned. But unfortunately, you need business cases to justify why places should get good communication technology, and that's what we see all the time when our federal MPs or even state governments announce a new tower for a black spot region. That would probably have occurred under the old charter of the former Telstra and Telecom Australia, would have just automatically happened. But now you need business cases to justify why Australians need good telecommunication technology, and it impacts businesses, medical staff, and just general communication of residents in rural areas, and you can see this obviously when you travel around even our local government area. The impacts on you quickly go from 4G to 3G and then nothing, so I think that there'll be a lot of sympathy for this recommendation by the National General Assembly for other rural regions that are impacted by communication difficulties, and I hope that ultimately what it results in is the government addressing the shortfalls of that system. And I think between 2010 and 2013, when the national broadband was sold to the people of fibre to the premise, I think ultimately that would have delivered the outcome that we needed. But I have to confess that even I was dubious in 2013 when I voted against that government. But I think that it was a mistake in hindsight not to have actually delivered the very best communication we could have to the most Australians we possibly could have.
Thank you, Councillor Rodder, and I'd urge you to be very cautious of your statements in this environment. They're getting very close to bordering on political statements, and as you're well aware, there will be no allowance for political statements on the floor of the council.
Mr Mayor, Councillor Rodder, I'd like to just ask a question, and that is, I know this is your motion and council will vote as to whether they want to submit it. I think it would be a better argument if we at least acknowledge the recent announcements around the enterprise zones that have been announced right around Australia. I mean, every business now within the Tamworth CBD and in other identified areas of Tamworth can now connect to the NBN free of charge. I think that needs to be acknowledged. I would probably just insert the word some businesses and residents, and I think it also needs to be acknowledged in your summary of key arguments that local business owner resided outside of the CBD. They reside on a rural property and it's a work from home business. Otherwise, if it could get torn to shreds just on the basis that you haven't put the arguments in context. So if you're happy, I'll make sure I bounce it before we submit, but I think those things need to be built into the argument before it's submitted to Congress.
Any further comments, councillors? I'd have some reservations, and I'm not sure whether we've been invited to lobby on behalf of some of these other local government areas, but I think it's the first time in my time in this chamber where we're actually suggesting that we should be lobbying, and I'm not aware whether we've even got permission to lobby on behalf of these other local government bodies in places like Binaway, Mandorah, Barradine, and the suggestion that these locations are in our managed services client area, that could be construed, I believe, to be a statement that it's in council's managed services client area, which it's in my view a misleading statement, and I don't think we should be making misleading statements. We should be really clear on what we're seeking to support, and for that reason, if that's the case, I'd have to vote against this motion, because I think it's inappropriate for us to be lobbying on behalf of other local government bodies that we don't have consent or approval to do so. I think that's my personal views. The mover and the seconder, do they have a view? I just think it's inappropriate.
Mr Mayor, I didn't look at it in that manner, but I agree with you that that's not without our area of delegation. My preference would be to have those townships removed.
Thank you.
And
the seconder, Councillor Betts.
I'd be happy to leave it in, Mr Mayor. I do understand your issue, but without having the time to research the implications, I'd be happy to leave it in.
Okay, well, I guess without the consent of the mover and the seconder, the motion as printed stands, so...
Unless there's an amendment, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, so... If there is no move to amend that, I don't wish to move an amendment from the chair. I don't believe that's appropriate. Councillors, if...
Mr Mayor, I'll move an amendment that the specific areas be removed and the rest remain consistent, apart from the suggestion made by the GM earlier to...
The acknowledgement of the business zones.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
If I've got a seconder.
We have a second, Councillor Maxwell, thank you. So, councillors, we're now dealing with the amendment, and it's just with those two to remove that that sentence that places such as Binnaway, Mandora and et cetera, locations in our managed area. Councillors, do we have any further comment on that amendment? If not, I will put the amendment. Those in favour? Those against? Councillor Roller against, thank you. The amendment now becomes a motion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour of the motion? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Item 10.1.
Move it.
Move Councillor Webb and Councillor Inglis, thank you. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, Mr Mayor.
Any councillors wish to speak against? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Inglis.
Mr Mayor, just as chair of the of that committee, just to recognise in particular, I see our art gallery director's here tonight. Very lovely to see her in the chamber. I know she gets very excited by council meetings. But do you feel, do we actually thank the donors prior to this? Because if we don't, I think we just could add those words that there's 20 works in there. They're not all donations, but quite a few of them are, that we officially thank the respective donors. I think that'd be appropriate. Because I'd like to just add those words, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We might do it as a matter of default anyway, but I think the recommendation should.
Yeah.
And so just add on the end, thank.
Yeah, and that the donors be thanked.
Formally thanked.
Be formally thanked for their important contribution.
And Councillor Webb, you're okay with that minor change? Thank you. Okay. Any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried. And that brings us now to item 11, matters to be considered in closed council. I'd like to make an offer for any of those members of the public if they wish to have any of those matters brought forward, or in fact any members of the council. If not, thank you for your interest and attention.
Thank you.
Let all the people back in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this report from the closed session of the ordinary council meeting held on the 23rd of March 2021. You considered 2 items in closed council, and for both of those items you adopted the recommendations as per the business paper.
So could we just have a motion to receive? Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Impey, thank you. Those in favour? Against? Carried, and that brings our meeting to a close.
Just had one thing, just quickly want to ask the councillors, and that is, so I've been talking to David Errington, who's the CEO of Apollo